lessons that David learned along the way and hopefully learned right alongside of him in this. It was a full life. It was a great life. It was a life that had very, very high peaks. And there were some valleys along the way too. He made some great faithful decisions. And you know, he's kind of like us. He's made a bonehead decision or two in his life too. But one of the things about David is he learned his lesson. And he always saw, okay, this ain't going to happen again. And I really appreciate that about David. And so we're going to be in this study for a long period of time. And so with that said, if you're in 1 Samuel chapter number 18, I want you to stand with me. I'm going to read the first 4 verses here. Verse 1 says, "Now it came to pass, when he had made an end of speaking unto Saul, that the soul of Jonathan was knit with the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him as his own soul. And Saul took him that day, and would let him let him go no more home to his father's house. Then Jonathan and David made a covenant, because he loved him as his own soul. And Jonathan stripped himself of the robe that was upon him, and gave it to David, and his garments, even to his sword, and to his bow, and to his girdle." Father, we do love you. Thank you for everything that you've done. You've been so good to us. And Lord, I thank you for the good day already. Lord, you've showed up. You showed us those things out of your word. And Lord, you've spoke to our hearts. Lord, there are people in the building even this morning that you spoke directly to. And Lord, I'm thankful, as Brother Glenn has prayed, that you were able to use me as a conduit. And Lord, I pray, Father, that the Word of God would do that same work today here in our building. Lord, I pray that you'll move me out of the way and you'll show up. Lord, that you'll give us exactly the message that you want each of us to have personally. And we'll be careful to thank you in Jesus' name. Amen. You may be seated. Last week when we left our study, we left the battlefield where David defeated Goliath. And I said at the end of that message that David's life was never going to be the same ever again. And that's going to be true. Never again would David be known as just the shepherd boy. Never again would David be an unknown and maybe obscure lad that just happens to come in and out. Those days are long gone for David. Now with this victory that God has given him on the battlefield, David is now thrust into the national spotlight. And he would remain in that spotlight for the rest of his life. Now, I'm going to step back here and just make an observation here. We live in a day and age where we want popularity. We want everybody to know who we are. That's the reason for Instagram and all the social media platforms. Because I want my 15 minutes of fame. I just want everybody, I want to be in the national spotlight. But you know, David ended up to be in the national spotlight. And I think there's plenty of times in his life where he probably thought, oh, I wish everybody didn't know who I was. I wish that everybody didn't just look at me. What about those days when nobody knew who I was? But now David is thrust into that spotlight. And there's never going to be a day for the rest of his life where he's not going to be in that spotlight. And verse 2 tells us that Saul was going to take him home, or take him that day, and he was not going to allow him to go home anymore to his father's house. Now that doesn't mean that David is a prisoner now in the palace. That's not what that means. It means that he is now important enough to Saul that his service will no longer be a temporary service, but it's going to be a permanent one. You'll remember up to this point, whenever Saul had that evil spirit come upon him, Saul's servant said, hey, the son of Jesse plays the harp, and he can soothe the soul. And so David had actually stood before Saul prior to the battlefield and had a different purpose. He played the harp, and when he played the harp, it soothed the soul of Saul. And when David was done, David would go back home to his father's Jesse's house. Those days are gone now. Now he is important enough to Saul that his service is going to be a permanent one. And as David comes to this part of his life, there's going to be some things that are going to come his way that he really is going to be taken by surprise. For example, he has just come out of the greatest battle he has faced up to this point in his young life. But what David did not know is there were going to be things in his future, battles in his future, that are going to be far greater battles than the battle he faced against Goliath. He is going to now face an ongoing battle. He's going to face a battle against rage and against the jealousy of King Saul. David doesn't know this yet, and no one else knows it either. But at this point, in chapter 18, in verse 1, 2, 3, and 4, everything seems to be great. His life is rosy. People are looking at him and says, oh, I wish I was David. You know, give that a couple months. And pretty soon nobody's going to want to be David. But at this particular time, everybody wants to be like him. But by the time chapter or verse 6 rolls around, everything's going to change. From verse 4 to verse 6, there is something that is going to be triggered here. Because in verse number 6, the army's going to come back from the battle. And as they come into Jerusalem, the women are going to come out with the tabrets, and they're going to be singing, and they're going to be chanting. And the message on their lips is, Saul has slain his thousands, but David is 10,000s. And when those ladies said that, that's going to spark something in King Saul. It's going to spark great jealousy and great envy. And that jealousy is going to consume Saul, and it's going to in turn make David's life very, very miserable. But while David doesn't know what the future holds, God does know. And God is going to provide David a friend that is going to help him, a friend that is going to encourage him during some really, really awful times. And that friend is going to be Jonathan. And Jonathan just happens to be the grown son of King Saul. Very unlikely friend. But God is going to provide this friend for David. Let me pause here and make a few observations here. This period in David's life is not an unusual period. Many times we find ourselves in a place where we've actually just come through a trial in our life, and only to realize that, the battle's not done. This is just one battle in a series of battles. And this is where David's at. David has just come through this battle. And, you would think, okay, man, everything's going to be great now. Man, I've got everything under control. It's going to be easy street from here on out. But David's going to realize pretty quickly that this is just the beginning. This is just one battle in a series of battles that he is going to face. And I say that's not unusual because God has a way of building us. And sometimes that includes us dealing with things in stages. You ever experienced that? Sure you have. You just get through something and you're like, okay, I learned my lesson. But then you quickly realize you had to learn that lesson, and you had to go through that experience to prepare you for the next thing that God has for you. And this is where David is at. Perhaps we, like David, would come through a battle successfully because we trusted God, because we allowed God to give us the victory, and then almost immediately we're faced with another trial, an even more difficult trial in front of us. Sometimes God does this because now that we've tasted success, now that we have seen victory by our faith, now we're ready for the next step. Now we're ready for our faith to be built upon even further. And a lot of times I've seen in my own life that had I experienced the second trial before the first trial, I probably wouldn't have been successful. And God knows that. And God knows that in your life too. But God says, okay, in order for him or her to be successful in this, they've got to learn a lesson in order to do that. And so in order for them to learn that lesson, there is something that I'm going to bring in their life. Something that they're going to have to trust me with. Something that they're going to have faith with. And they're going to taste that success. They're going to see what faith and trusting me is going to bring. And now, because they've tasted that and they've learned that lesson, now this next battle, they're going to be able to face that because they're equipped for that battle. That happens in our lives all the time. Sometimes, it just happens that way. And we don't even realize that it's that way. But doesn't the Bible tell us that God is faithful? Doesn't the Bible tell us that God will not suffer us to be tempted above that you are able? It's exactly what the Bible says. And there are certain stages and levels that we pass before we reach such a goal. And with each level of faith, God gives us everything we need in order to be successful. David is about ready to enter into another battle that will make his battle with Goliath seem like nothing. That battle he's going to face is going to make that giant look like a midget. And it's going to be tough. He is going to face the rage of King Saul. And that battle is going to last a whole lot longer than just a few minutes in the valley of Elah. It is going to go on and on and on for several years. And it will be a battle where David is going to be on the defensive for most of the time. I want you to think about the valley of Elah, him facing Goliath. David was not on the defensive, was he? He went there, he was unarmed, as far as no armor, nothing like that. He had 5 smooth stones. He had a sling. A little trash talking going on there. And what does the Bible tell us? It says that David ran towards that giant. Took the fight to the giant. And sometimes that's a whole lot easier to do in a battle. But for the next several years, David can't do that. In fact, for the next several years, David is going to be on the defensive for most of his time. But even though he's going to go through all of that, and remember in chapter 18, verse 1, 2, 3, and 4, he doesn't know he's about ready to go in there. But God's going to give him something for that battle. What's God going to give him? God's going to give him a friend. God's going to give him somebody that is going to help him through those things. How many times have we faced something in life we thought would take us under and a friend helped us through? That's exactly the kind of friend that God gave David. Now, here in chapter number 18, this is not the first time that we see Jonathan in the Bible. In fact, in chapter number 14, we read about Jonathan's slaughter of the Philistines. And that happened at least 14 years prior to the time that we're studying here. So we know that Jonathan was probably twice the age of David. They were not contemporaries. Jonathan was quite a bit older than him. Nevertheless, these two men form a friendship that all other friendships are going to be measured by. Now, I want to give us just 3 quick points here about friendship. And I want to look, first of all, at an unlikely friendship. God uses a word here that I thought was very, very interesting. In verse number 1, it says that the soul of Jonathan was knit with the soul of David. I automatically get this thought. When you knit, you join things together, don't you? And it's just not one loop. It's like everything. One of the things my daughters both like doing is knitting. In fact, Jessie, to this day, knits constantly. And I know a lot of times we look at knitting as something Grandma used to do. But for some reason, Jessie just really takes to that. Whenever one of her friends has baby, Jessie will knit a blanket and all, and she's so good at it. She watches TV and does whatever she does, and it's just second nature to her. And it's just amazing just to kind of watch her do that. But what she's doing is she is taking 2 separate pieces of yarn or whatever you're doing, and you've got 2 sticks and you're doing all of this, and next thing you know, everything is being knit together. It kind of becomes one. And that is what the soul of Jonathan and the soul of David is doing there. They became that close. And this friendship, I call an unlikely friendship, is because these 2 men were very, very different. We have already spoke of the difference in their ages, but their backgrounds are also pretty different. Jonathan comes from royalty. Jonathan's a prince. David's a shepherd. Jonathan is royalty. David is a commoner. And yet, these 2 became the closest of friends. Now, let me just kind of remind us. Friendships are not found in somebody identical to us, somebody that's just like us. In fact, a lot of times that causes problems. When you got 2 people that are too much alike, especially, for example, if you got two people that are very, very stubborn, you know, that's a recipe for, kind of for disaster, You probably don't want to spend a whole lot of time, 2 stubborn people together. We're going to drop the gloves, drop the sticks, and next thing you know, we're going to go at it. But these 2 men, they are so, so different. And a lot of times, when we think about friendship, we think about, I want somebody just like me. But some of the best friendships forged are with people that are nothing like you. And Jonathan and David is a good example of that. When you see these 2 men standing in the same room together, you would never think that these 2 would make great friends. One's older, one's younger. They come from 2 different cities, 2 different backgrounds. They don't have anything in common, yet they had a great friendship, and we measured all great friendships against the friendship of Jonathan and David. One of the things that's necessary in true friendship, is a level playing field. And even though one's royalty and one's a shepherd, when they got together, they were on a level playing field. One was not more important than the other. And that's something for us to kind of consider. Who are your true friends? How did you form those friendships? And are you loyal to that friend? Is that friend loyal to you? A lot of questions here. What happens when trials come your way? How does your friend respond? What about when trials come their way? How do you respond when they're in trials? How do we respond to that? Have you ever considered that God just may send somebody into your life that's going to help you in your time of need? And maybe God will send somebody in your life that you can help in their time of need. But how are we going to do that? A level playing field. You know what we are? We're just friends. That's what we are. We're just friends. Nobody's bigger than the other. Nobody's more important than the other. And failed friendships a lot of times result in the fact that one thinks they're more important than the other, or one's needs are more important than the other. Consider, let me pull somebody out. Josiah's in here. Josiah, I see you. There's Josiah. Me and Josiah were friends. And Josiah's got a need. Josiah's got a trial. Josiah needs a friend. What kind of friend would I be if I looked at Josiah and said, well, your trial's not that important. But then when a trial comes my way, and Josiah, my friend, looks at me, I would feel pretty bad if Josiah said, well, your trial's not that important. I'm going to go back playing Xbox. I'm going to pray for you. But just leave me alone. That's not a good friendship, is it? But a good friendship is somebody that will engage in the life of somebody else, no matter what is going on. That's one of the things that I see in some of our people here, some of our members here at Berean are very much in this category. They see the needs of somebody, they engage in those needs. They pray for those needs. Outside of the church setting, they'll contact that person and says, hey, friend, just want to let you know I'm praying for you. Is there anything you need? You know what that does? It strengthens a bond between true friends. Friendship has got to be free of selfishness. And most selfish people have very few friends. I want to, in fact, why don't you turn there with me? Hold your place here and go with me to Proverbs chapter 18. Bible has a lot to say about friends, and we're going to get into some of that tonight. But in chapter 18 of Proverbs, verse 24, a man that hath friends must show himself friendly. And there is a friend that sticketh closer than a brother. I like this verse because it shows us the value of being friendly to somebody else. A lot of times, people sit around and mope, I have no friends. But you've not shown yourself friendly. And there's a reason you don't have any friends. When people walk by you and you give off the vibe that stay away, you don't have any friends. You know what I'm saying? But man, if you get up and you start engaging in people and hey, can I pray for you? Hey, how you doing today? And is there something I can pray with you about? Or something like that. You start engaging in people, guess what? You're going to have friends. You're going to have friends. Doesn't matter how young you are and how old you are. It doesn't matter if you're a prince or if you're a shepherd. You're going to have some friends. And the Bible is very specific about this. A man that hath friends must show himself friendly. Must show himself friendly. And of course, There is a friend that sticketh closer than a brother. That, of course, is talking about Jesus. I see here an unlikely friendship between these two men. Number two, I see an unfeigned friendship. That word unfeigned is just a simple word that means a genuine. It's not fake. And you're going to notice that in chapter 18 and verses 1 through 4, it is Jonathan that initiates his friendship, not David. But why? Why would Jonathan do that? There is nothing that Jonathan could gain from having David as a friend. Have you ever thought about that? He's the prince. I don't need David to be my friend. If he acted like some people that we all may know, we would say, well, wait a minute. I'm the prince. He's a shepherd. I don't need him. If I want some lamb chops, I'm just going to go to the market. I don't need David. But yet Jonathan, who socially speaking is up here, looked at David and initiates this friendship, even though there is nothing that Jonathan could gain from it. If you are friends with someone because you think that you stand to gain, it's not true friendship, and it's not going to last. You want a Bible example? The prodigal son had some friends, didn't he? Just as long as he had a little ka-ching in his pocket. You know why they were his friends? Because they could benefit from it. They stood to gain. But when the ka-ching went goodbye, the prodigal didn't have any friends. Jonathan, though he had nothing to gain, initiates this friendship. And friendships, we're going to see, are not self-serving. Friendships are self-sacrificing instead. That is the polar opposite. And I want you to notice that Jonathan gives David several things, including his weapons and his royal garments. I want to deal with these in just two different categories. By giving him his weapons, Jonathan is sending a message. And I want you to consider the context, because right before chapter 18, the last few verses, we are going to see David standing in front of Saul. And Saul is going to outfit him with armor and a sword and all of that. David walked around, probably looked kind of goofy in all of them. And he put those things off. And he says, no, I've not tried these things. I'm not going into battle with these things. I'm going into battle with one weapon and one weapon only. I'm going into battle with God. I'm going into battle with faith. God is going to see me through, and if not, so be it. But I ain't going to trust God. I'm putting myself in His hands. And that's the context in all of this. And when Jonathan comes, he gives him those weapons. I wonder, and just one of these thoughts that come through my head, if Jonathan said, David didn't need these weapons, he had faith. Do you know what, David? Here's these weapons. I'm also going to live by faith. Just a thought. But the second thing he gives him is those garments. Why did he give those garments? Well, by giving his garments, he is putting himself on that level playing field. You know what a prince wears as garments? Royal garments. And he says, David, here, I'm taking these off, I'm giving them to you. I am not your prince. I am your friend. I'm your equal. And perhaps Jonathan knew deep in his heart that one day it was going to be David that was going to be on the throne instead of him. Maybe Jonathan recognized that way back then. I don't know. But Saul expected his son Jonathan to succeed him on the throne. But God had already anointed David. Jonathan didn't know that yet. But I think maybe Jonathan recognized this young man who had the guts, the courage, the strength, the faith to go and face that giant. He is the true champion of Israel right now. And there is something special about this young man. God's going to do something with this young man. And maybe I'll never sit on the throne of my father, but I can see him being king. That day, when Jonathan and David, their souls were knit together, they made a covenant with each other. And you know that covenant was enduring. These two men valued their friendship all the way until the day that Jonathan died. So I see an unfeigned friendship. This is not fake. This is not put on. This is not for show. They spent years proving to everyone around that this friendship was real. Number 3, not only was it an unlikely friendship and an unfeigned friendship, it was an undivided friendship. We're going to see later on in this study that Jonathan's going to find himself stuck in the middle of a very, very personal conflict. That conflict's going to be between his dad and his friend. I mean, he's going to be stuck in the middle. Saul is going to set his sights on killing David. He views David as a threat. He is consumed with the fact that everybody thinks that David is greater than he is. And he is going to do everything he can, even throwing the javelin at him on 2 separate occasions, sending men to try to get him in his bedchamber, even hunting him like a wild animal in the wilderness. This is going to be a very, very public conflict, and Jonathan's going to be the one that's going to be stuck in the middle. His loyalties are going to be divided between his friend and his father. And he's going to try to kind of walk the line here a little bit, but you can't do that in a conflict like that. And Jonathan's father, Saul, is going to exert tremendous pressure upon him to end this friendship. Even telling Jonathan that as long as David lived, he would never ever see the throne. He's trying to put this pressure on him to end this friendship. But no matter what, this friendship remained undivided. When we look at this extraordinary friendship that existed between these two men, it should cause us to examine our own friendships. It's not just from the viewpoint of what kind of friends do I have, because we ought to look at that. But if that's all the further we go, we're missing it. Because when we look at our friends list, instead of saying, what kind of friends do I have? Why don't we just turn around and say, what kind of friend am I to them? Because we never really think about that, do we? We look and say, Isaac, why am I his friend? You know, with Facebook, you can be friends with everybody, and you can unfriend somebody with just one click of the mouse. You know, a lot of times we treat our friends like we're purging our friends list on Facebook. But instead of you looking and see, what is he or what does she bring to the table? What do they bring into my life? Why don't we stop and say, hey, wait a minute, what kind of friend have I been to them? What do I bring into their life? How do I benefit their life? And that's the kind of things we ought to be looking at when it comes to friends. We have power and responsibility to encourage our friends that are around us. We can accomplish things in the lives of other people just by being a true Christian friend. We have that ability. I promise you this. You want to make an impact in somebody's life? Befriend them. Do something for them. Be nice to them. You'll have an impact in somebody's life. A lot of times we think that we're going to make an impact by meeting somebody and talking to them in 2.5 minutes that is going to be so profound in their life it's going to change them forever. It doesn't often work that way. When we make a difference in somebody's life, it's when we become part of their lives. We become their friend. You say, well, preacher, doesn't seem like I'm getting anywhere. Be patient. Be patient. Do you know there are people that I've had a relationship for 2-3 years. Invite them to church, witness to them all the time. And just seems like, well, you know what, I'm not really getting anywhere. And then before you know it, something happens. And God uses me to make an impact in their life. And then that opens the door to become even closer to that person. And you know, that person will say to me almost every time, you know, all those times I was trying to put you off, I was listening to you. Those times that I was putting you off, I just didn't want to face it. But you know, you were faithful, you were kind, and I knew that you were sincere in wanting the best for me. And basically what they're saying is, you were a real friend to me even when I didn't want to be a friend to you. Friendship and engaging in somebody's life, you're going to make a difference in their lives, and you can accomplish some great things. But let me just run a few verses down here with you about a true friend, and we're going to be done. You're in Proverbs right now. I want you to go to chapter 17, verse 17. Verse 17 says, a friend loveth at all times, and a brother is born for adversity. Now, there's two things in this verse that you need to pay attention to. One is our love. It's got to be constant. A friend loveth at all times. But look at the second part, and a brother is born for adversity. I look at that verse and I say, hey, adversity is not going to drive my friend away. Adversity, my friend, is going to engage in this. Adversity, my friend is going to have my back. Adversity, he's going to be there by my side. He's not just a friend, now he's a brother. And he was born for this. This is what he wants to do with me and for me. That's a true friend. He is a faithful friend. I want you to look at chapter 18 and verse 24, and we've already read this verse, but he's a loyal friend. A man that hath friends must show himself friendly, and there is a friend that sticketh closer than a brother. He's loyal. Chapter 27, Proverbs chapter 27, verse 17. True friend makes us better. He doesn't drag us down. Chapter 27, verse 17. Iron sharpeneth iron. So a man sharpeneth the countenance of his friend. Iron sharpeneth iron. I heard tell that Pastor Faulkner's got a message based upon this concept. Iron sharpening iron. What does that mean? That means that friends make each other better. They encourage one another. They challenge one another. They don't drag us down. Iron sharpeneth iron. I kind of get this idea here. Maybe you got two axes, maybe you got two swords, whatever. They're sharpening each other. They're not banging each other and making themselves dull. They have a purpose. They're making each other better. And that's what true friends do. They make each other better. And finally, I want you to go to Ecclesiastes chapter 4. verse 9 and 10. Two are better than one, because they have a good reward for their labor. And if they fall, the one will lift up his fellow. But woe to him that is alone when he falleth, for he hath not another to help him up. A true friend is somebody that's there, that's going to lift you up, that is going to be there for you. Especially when we fall. When we need a friend, we want somebody to be there. But there's a woe there, isn't there? What is that woe? Woe is to that man that falls down and doesn't have anybody to lift him up. Let me get the exact wording. But woe to him that is alone when he falleth, for he hath not another to help him up. You know, somebody has no friends, finds themselves in a spot where they need a friend and wish they had a friend, but never showed themselves friendly and didn't want to have that friend. And that's a bad place to be in. We want friends. We should want friends. And our friendship, our relationship with our friends ought to be a friendship where our hearts are knit together. I'm not sure that we'll ever have a friendship as close as David and Jonathan. But maybe we will, and maybe we'll come close. But I know this, it was a benefit to both of them. When both of them struggled, there was somebody, the other one was right there to encourage them, to help them up. When David looked around and he was in trouble, he had his mighty men around him. He had his 400 around him. But you know what? He got with Jonathan. And he got encouraged. You know, I think that we all need a Jonathan. And I think we all need a David. We need somebody in our lives that is going to help us. That is one of the great things about the opportunities in front of us as a church and as Christians and as members of this local church. We are family and we have each other's back. And it's just not a Sunday friendship or a Wednesday friendship. It is a lot closer than that. One of the things that I appreciate about Pastor Faulkner is I know Pastor Faulkner is engaging in people's lives. You know why? Because he wants to pray for you. He wants to pray for me. And you know, there are times I'll get a text and I'll know without even looking, that's Pastor Faulkner. And sure enough, I'll pick up the phone. Hey, Pastor, just want to let you know I'm praying for you. Love you. Appreciate you. And he'll usually send me some kind of funny GIF or GIF or wherever you fall on that. But something like that. You know what? That encourages me. That helps me. And, you know, there are times where I'm thinking, you know what? That fella put me to shame. You know, I wish I could do that with everybody else. But Terrence is there for that. And, you know, I appreciate that about you, Terrence. And that's why I send you all those funny things back. But he encourages me during the week. And we all need that. We all need to be a friend, and we need to have friends like that. We often don't talk about this relationship when we study the life of David, but it was important. And I think it's far more important than we could ever imagine. But it was important, and we can benefit from this. Father, we do love you. Thank you for just this simple lesson on friendship. We get to see it play out in front of us. Lord, over the next several weeks, Jonathan is going to pop up often in our study. And I'm glad that you gave us chapter 18, verses 1 through 4, just to let us know there's a context here that these two are lifelong, loyal friends. And when Jonathan shows up on the scene, he's always an encouragement. Lord, help us to strive to be like that. Help us to be an encourager. Help us to be friends to other people. Lord, even people that walk into our church that don't know anybody in our congregation, and yet they walked into a strange place to worship you. And Lord, they probably didn't walk in looking for a friend. But Lord, I pray that every person that walks in the door of our church will leave our church knowing that they've just made some friends. And they've met some people that love them and people that are concerned about them. Help us to exercise this ability to be friendly and to be an encouragement to others. Now, Lord, I pray, Father, during this invitation time that you'll bless. May there be some people praying for their friends. May there be some people here at the altar praying that they could be a better friend. Lord, may there be some people here at the altar that would just say, Lord, who would you want me to befriend this week? Lord, send somebody into my path this week that I can be an encouragement to. Lord, I pray, Father, that we would all have that desire in Jesus' name. Amen.